Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm Michael Gaynor, president of GoRail, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar, All Aboard Navigating FRA's National Railroad Partnership Program. For those of you who may not be familiar with us, GoRail is a national nonprofit that educates local leaders and communities about the public benefits of freight rail. Railroads are not just integral to our supply chains, they're 3 to 4 times more fuel efficient than trucks, reduce highway wear and tear, drive economic growth, and support nearly 1 million jobs across the country. Our goal is to make sure the voices of state and local leaders and citizens are heard in the national conversation about freight rail policy. Another goal is to ensure communities are empowered to work with railroads and leverage federal resources to advance safety, mobility, and economic development. One of the ways that we do that is by sharing rail-related grant opportunities through the GoRail Grant Hub, where we track federal and railroad-hosted funding programs that support local infrastructure priorities. Today's webinar is a continuation of that work. In our last session, we were joined by FRA Deputy Administrator Drew Feely and had a productive discussion about the vital role of discretionary grant programs like the Rail Crossing Elimination Program in improving rail safety and efficiency. That conversation underscored what we all know. 95% of rail-related facilities occur at grade crossings, making this a top priority for FRA and the administration alike. As Congress works on the next surface transportation reauthorization, GoRail is advocating for robust funding for programs like CRISI, RCE, Infra, and MEGA that will allow the public sector to partner with railroads on infrastructure upgrades that improve freight fluidity and the community safety. We hope today's conversation helps you feel better equipped to pursue these grants and engage with partners in advancing your rail priorities. Now, to get started, we're fortunate to have a fantastic panel with us today. From the FRA, we're joined by Remy Work, Lauren Kobayashi, and Sergio Coronado, who will walk us through the updated National Railroad Partnership Program, or NRP, including project types, eligibility, and application strategies. We'll then hear from Laura Dowd of the Michigan Department of Transportation about how her team approaches project planning, long-term goals, and partnerships. And finally, we'll hear from Herbert Smith of Norfolk Southern, who will provide a railroad perspective on effective collaboration and how communities can align with industry goals. Before we begin, just a couple of quick housekeeping notes. We are recording today's session, and we'll make that video and slides available afterwards. We'll also have time at the end for Q&A, so please type your questions into the Q&A box at any time, and we'll get to those we'll get to as many as we can. With that, let's dive in, and I'll hand it over to Sergio.
Thanks, Michael. Let me do the awkward pause here where I try to share my screen and maybe stall with some introductions while I do that. I'm Sergio Coronado, as Michael mentioned. I'm with the Federal Railroad Administration's Rail Infrastructure Programs Division. So that's the office that essentially handles all our competitive grant programs, such as, of course, NRP, but not only that, the Consolidated Rail Infrastructure Program, CRISI, as we know it better, the Railroad Crossing Elimination Program, otherwise known as RCE. And I'm joined by two of my fantastic colleagues, Remy Work and Lauren Kobayashi, who will do a better job of probably explaining anything than I could. So they'll jump in to keep me honest where necessary. I just want to point out that, we're here to have a conversation with you all. We're here to talk with you, not at you. So I highly encourage you all to, pose any questions you may have as we're going along. And we really encourage them because that's what we're here for, is to address any comments, concerns, or questions you may have. So enough rambling. Let me go ahead and get started on some of the slides here. So I apologize, first of all, for my poor graphic design. I'm not the best artist, but I do my best. So our agenda for today is we'll start with an overview of the partnership program, or as I call Overview City. From there, we'll go over to safety stations. So Lauren will kind of walk you through a couple of elements that we're looking for in applications when it comes to not only grade crossing projects, but other projects as well, and some resources that you may want to use. And then we'll kind of pivot over to how to apply town. And that's where Remy will kind of take over and go over some basic information on where you can find the NELFO and how to apply, what documents you should submit as part of your application. And then, of course, we'll end with Question City, my favorite city of all, and that's when we're gonna, well, I guess we'll save that till the very end there. But we'll take your questions, at any point. So don't feel like you have to wait for the last stop there. Okay. So, giving you an overview, many of you might have already kind of attended the partnership webinar that we've done in the past, but essentially the program funds capital projects that enhance rail safety, reduce the state of good repair, improve performance, expand or establish new intercity passenger rail service. And I'll touch on what exactly that means here in a second. But looking at a timeline of the program as it stands right now, we published a notice of funding opportunity for which announced about $5 billion on the 22nd of September. That little symbol there tells us we're kind of here in November. It actually should be further closer to December. So again, apologies on that end. And then our applications are set to be due January 7th, 2026. So bringing in the new year with some applications, which is exciting. So then we have what could be, anywhere from a 5 to 6 month gap there, right? What are we doing in that time frame? That's when you're taking your applications, making sure that they're complete, submitted on time, that your project is eligible, and I'll talk about that in a second. And then evaluating your project for its, benefits, your technical merit as an applicant, and its readiness, of course. We're then briefing our senior leadership, on every project that came in. Every project that's considered eligible will be, put in front of our senior leadership. From there, we, maybe June, July timeframes, we'll have our selections. Now, this is tentative, of course. This is subject to change, of course, based on the administration's desires, but this is how the timeline kind of stands as of right now. So who can apply? You're probably looking at this. It's a lot of jargon right now, but I think, the main takeaways here are our State Department of Transportations, of course, our public agencies, and then Amtrak, of course. Political subdivision of a state, yeah, that's just government gobbledygook for, our cities, our towns, our county governments, board of supervisors, things of that nature. If you have questions about, your entity, I just encourage you to reach out. We can't tell you for sure that you're eligible, but we can kind of point you in the right direction, right? We can kind of tell you what area you're likely to fit in. So if you have specific questions about that, don't hesitate to reach out. What's eligible? These are the statutory criteria. What does that mean? That's the legal definition that the program puts out there. So projects that replace, rehabilitate, repair, projects that improve IPR service performance. And IPR stands for intercity passenger rail. You're hearing me say that a lot, so I'll just shorthand it to IPR. Or a project that establishes or expands new IPR service, including privately operated IPR service. So if you boil that down a little bit further to, basic English, that's rolling stock, so we can fund new trains, we can fund grade crossing improvements, we can fund track rehabilitation, we can fund station improvements, expansions, you name it. We can fund tunnel and bridges and signal and communications equipment. As long as it's related to any of those categories and intercity passenger rail service, it's eligible. When you think about the types, what we call life cycle stages of projects that are eligible, it's everything from project planning, project development, final design, and construction. Some of those areas are kind of further boiled down into, so if you think of project development, think of it as NEPA and preliminary engineering. If you think of project planning, think of it as project planning, stakeholder engagement, consideration of alternatives, and final design and construction are pretty straightforward, I hope. But if you have any questions about this, don't hesitate to ask. Okay, so one thing that we want to point out that, we see kind of time and time again in terms of questions is, non-federal match. So all of our programs, including NRP, require a 20% non-federal match. So that's mandatory. So unfortunately, the federal share can't exceed 80%. Any project or application that we receive that doesn't have that match, unfortunately, is considered ineligible. So it's extremely important that you consider, the 20% match as you're putting together your application. And on that note, we don't round up, unfortunately, and I might cover that on another slide. So you do need that exact 20% match. We just ask you to kind of identify where that match is coming from as well. If you don't have it fully secured, in other words, say you're waiting on a state discretionary grant or a state competitive grant, and you're waiting to find out whether it's going to be awarded to your application or your project. Just tell us, all we ask is that you be clear with us, to let us know when you might potentially find out whether that's going to be awarded or not. But we just want the source identified ultimately. If you have some sort of in-kind contribution that you're going to be considering as part of your local match, that's eligible, of course. Just make sure you're consistent with 2 CFR Part 200. especially if you're considering a land donation of sort. There is some kind of market value aspects to that. So just make sure you look at that CFR. And that's fancy talk for Code of Federal Regulations. If you have a specific question about an in-kind contribution, please reach out. We'd love to have that conversation with you. Touching on, providing the source of match, if you have documentation on that source, that goes a long way. Funding commitment letters, whether that's from a local government, your state government, outlining, hey, we have this funding available and we're committed to this project, goes a long way to showing FRA that you have the funding source available and ready to go. So a couple of things that we see. If you've gotten to this point and you think this is pretty good, this is up your alley, you'd like to apply, I just want to point out some things that we see when people do apply that causes kind of a heartache on our end. The first thing is, of course, no intercity passenger rail component. I think the easiest way to boil that down is there a state-supported route, what we call kind of Amtrak service or Brightline service? Is that existing on the infrastructure that you're applying for? You have to make it clear how the project will benefit IPR service. A project that's kind of strictly freight or commuter rail, meaning there's no intercity passenger rail service whatsoever, would be considered ineligible. Now, there can be freight, commuter, and IPR all together, or one and IPR, but there has to be some benefit to intercity passenger rail service in order to be considered for funding under this program. Just want to make that clear. Matching funds, I kind of just went on a long spiel about matching funds, right? Applicants who don't provide enough are considered ineligible. So unfortunately, we can't round up, right? 19.9% just isn't a 20% when it comes to the statutory requirement. Now, the scope, if you've previously received federal funding for this project, whether that's from us, Federal Highway Administration, Federal Transit Administration, or another federal agency, and you're applying for that same type of project, but we don't know what the difference is, it might be ineligible. And ultimately, that boils down to we can't pay for the same thing twice, right? We need to understand how your application is different from your previous federal request if you've gotten the award. If you submit an application for federal funding before and it hasn't been awarded, just let us know, but it won't cause any heartache on it. Okay, so I'm probably wondering why I'm bringing this ugly triangle in front of you that's making your eyes bleed. I promise there's a purpose. This is what we kind of consider our evaluation and selection criteria. So our evaluation criteria is our project readiness, our project benefits, and our technical merit. Then we have our selection criteria, which we'll cover, of course, our selection preferences, NEPA considerations, and the benefit cost analysis, which is a requirement for the program. The triangle is supposed to demonstrate the relationship between technical merit, project readiness, and project benefits, all working together to give your project an overall rating. And we have a rubric on each of these elements that will give you a better sense in the NOFA, that is, of what goes in specifically to project benefits, how project readiness is evaluated, and how technical merit of the applicant is evaluated. And then on the side of the ugly triangle, you have the selection considerations, right? NEPA, benefit cost analysis, and preferences. So again, my colleagues make fun of me for the triangle, but I hope it's giving you, some better understanding of how these work together. And so with that, I will now stop rambling and I'll hand it off to my colleague, Lauren Kobayashi.
Thanks, Sergio. Yeah, we'll jump there on the preferences bit in the next slide. Sergio will go to the next slide, please.
Oh, is it not moving on your end?
No.
Bear with me, folks. 1 second. I'm just going to try reach.
I'll explain a little bit while Sergio does that, how the preferences work. And so in addition to the eval criteria that Sergio just laid out, we also have selection preferences. These can help boost an application or project when it comes to time of selection, but not having them doesn't necessarily harm your project in a way that not meeting evaluation criteria may. And so these get added on after we get these overall ratings and things like that. And we have 4 sort of selection preferences. why don't I try sharing my screen?
Yeah, looks like
I think
Sergio
he's
is
frozen.
no longer with us, which is scary because I'm in the same space, so I might also be no longer with us in a moment. But yeah, Lauren, I'll let you know when I can see it.
Okay. Yeah, he's like gone now. Sorry, everyone. Technical difficulties, of course.
I also have the slides and I can try to load if you're having an issue, Lauren.
I've got them. Let me
Oh, okay.
just make sure that I can find. I feel like if I shared this, let's see. Oh, are you just saying? Oh,
Yeah,
It's
it looks
loading.
like it's gonna load.
glitching out. Okay, wait.
Nope, got it.
Am I back?
I can see it.
Okay. Okay. I know I had an error on my screen. So these are selection preferences. Sorry about that, everybody. We have projects that demonstrate an ability. This one's more to foster a safe transportation system. This is where we really get into the safety side of this program and of FRA's mission as a whole. We have a preference for applications where Amtrak is not the sole applicant, and so this would be where probably a lot of you would come in as project sponsors for these projects. Projects that improve financial performance, reliability, service frequency, or address the state of good repair of an Amtrak route. Again, this is really targeting the types of projects we would like to see in this program, anything that really improves that intercity passenger rail service, as Sergio was talking about. And then this last one, I'm not sure we've got anyone quite here yet, but this is our tie into our corridor identification and development program, where we are looking at new or expanded routes. And to the first bullet point, FRA hosted a partnership webinar that talked entirely about safety considerations. This is up on our website, but I will touch on a few highlights here in a second, including, but first we'll do some more general program messaging. So this is sort of the updated look at the FSP NRP program. We are looking for projects that address family-friendly activities. And so this can be things like mother's rooms or family restrooms, children's play areas, things like that. And typically stations is kind of where this fits in this program. We are also looking for projects that are for final design and or construction. So those latter phases of that project lifecycle guidance that Sergio touched on, looking to really break ground and do some of those construction phases rather than, or in addition to the planning phases as well. We do have a set aside for projects that touch any long distance routes, which are routes that are 750 miles or longer, all run by Amtrak. And so if your project does touch a long distance route, whether that be a station or the track work or anything in between, that is not only eligible, but you have specific money set aside for those types of projects. And then we are looking for projects that have private sector participation. So whether that's funds from private sector, whether it's letters of support from host railroad infrastructure owners, things like that. And any sort of participation in the process throughout the planning, development, or construction of the project is definitely preferred. Back to Sergio's triangle. Again, this sort of ties in all of those pieces that we just talked about. And where specifically safety will be focused on during the evaluation and selection processes. So it is part of your project benefits evaluation criteria. This will be something that you address in a project narrative and will be specifically looked at by our reviewers when we're undergoing those processes. As well as I said, there is a selection preference for projects that enhance safety. And so because this is such a focus of the administration, the program, and FRA generally, definitely very important to address this in your application as much as possible and provide quantifiable evidence that speaks to how you are improving safety in a project. And if quantifiable evidence is hard to come by, we also appreciate qualitative evidence as well. But that brings me to my next point, which is trying to get into those safety projects as well as where to find that data to back up the safety elements of your project. These are a few examples of projects that address safety. Obviously, railroad crossings, the safest crossing is no crossing. So if you can eliminate a crossing, that definitely improves safety. But even upgrading crossings to having gates and lights or other mechanisms to prevent accidents is great. Improving or installing protective devices, signals, or signs, improvements to catenary systems, any sort of track replacement or improvement that will reduce the risk of derailments is also considered a safety project. And replacing any other capital assets beyond their useful life, with a few examples there. And again, this is just an example list. It's not comprehensive by any means. And so there are lots of projects we know that touch on safety, but these are the ones that came to our mind. And then looking at resources for, these are grade crossing specific applications, but FRA has a lot of data on our website about grade crossings, and there many like databases and things like that. And so this top link here brings you to the complete database, and then the cards on the right show more curated views. You can filter by your location, crossing IDs, any other relevant data points, and you can get incident counts and things like that over the course of any number of years you decide to look at. But this is a great start in trying to put together a grade crossing application. But of course, there are many other pieces that go into that as well, but can be a good data point. And with that, I'm going to throw it to Remy to talk about how to apply.
Thanks, Lauren. And as you can all see, I am now by Sergio, who was unable to rejoin the meeting. But I'm going to try to keep this brief, make sure that we have time to get to all the other fabulous panelists that we have. Next slide, please. So if you are interested in looking at a step-by-step process for how to apply to a grant program, we have this one really good resource on our website, which might be the prettiest thing on our website, as opposed to GoRail having a ton of really beautiful resources. We don't have that many, but we do have this website. That's our discretionary grants application process website. And it lists all of the different steps in how to submit an application, starting from registering with sam.gov, getting your unique entity identifier, and then creating an account with grants.gov and how to apply at grants.gov as well. And it also walks through the timeline for when you would expect to receive an award and what the general timeframe is for the application process. So please feel free to check out that website. Next slide, please. Oh, yeah, thanks. And so once you register and you're all set with SAM, you're all set with grants.gov, you're gonna probably ask yourself, okay, what do I include in my application? This is all listed out in our NOFO, but these are the most important documents, and most of these are required. First thing is your project narrative. This is really where you get to tell the story of your project from start to finish, who's involved, what you're planning on doing, and what benefits this project is going to have on your community. So we talk more about that in our NOFO. Please check that out. Next is the attachment 2, articles 4 through 7. This is also required. We have templates for these on our website if you're interested in that. We're trying to make this process as simple as possible. So be sure to use the templates that are provided. Next is a benefit cost analysis. You have to upload that as an Excel file for projects requesting final design and or construction funding, but you could just do a qualitative version of the BCA if your project is only requesting funds for planning or project development. Again, we have a template for this. Please check that out. Some corridor ID documentation, if that applies to your project. We would love to see some support from the corridor sponsor if you're not the applicant. Environmental compliance, otherwise known as NEPA documentation. Just let us know where you are in the NEPA process, whether or not you're done or you're just in the process still. You can just show us what you have. Again, we're just kind of looking to gather as much information as possible. Just tell us a story of where you're at. Same thing applies to a draft use or ownership agreement if this is applicable. So if your project is located in rights of way that you do not own yourself, we would love to see a letter of support from the host infrastructure owner. You do not need to have a completed 22905 agreement at the time of application, but let us know where you are in those conversations. Really give us as much detail as you can. Tell your story. Next slide. Some other forms that are required is the SF-424 application for federal assistance, FRA's additional assurances and certifications, FRA F30, the FRA's applicant financial capability questionnaire, FRA F251, and the disclosure of lobbying activities as well. All of these are on grants.gov, should be really easy to find, and there's also a support inbox that you can reach out to if you are having problems with the grants.gov. Next slide, please. So this is actually our 4th time presenting on our most recent NOFO. So we've linked here some of our previous slide decks from our other webinars that we did. So that would be the Safety and Major Capital Projects webinar and our BCA and NEPA Best Practices webinar. Links here will bring you to the presentation files, but you can also find a recorded webinar on our website. We've also linked some guidance. First one's from FRA, that's our guidance on railroad capital projects. That really goes into detail on each of the required documents that you should include in an application, some really in-depth explanations of our life cycle stages and anything else that you would need to know to submit an application successfully. We have the USDOT BCA guidance and the BCA template. Again, really trying to plug as much as possible the use of templates, the use of the resources that we have available. We want people to submit applications that are successful. Next slide. So that's it from us. Again, we really want to help you. We're really excited to hopefully have some time at the end of this presentation after the other panelists go to address any questions that you might have, but we're not going to get to everyone's questions. So please reach out to us. You can send your questions to our NOFO support box or any combination of us, and we can try our best to answer your questions, or we can set up a meeting with you and your team to talk about any confusion that you're having over the application process and your project. We cannot provide a ton of like very in-depth specific details about like specific projects. We cannot make eligibility determinations in advance of reviewing your application, but we can have a conversation and we can hopefully help you feel prepared in submitting your application. That's it.
Well, wonderful. Thank you, FRA team. Thank you, Sergio, Remy, and Lauren. Really appreciate it. And let's hand it over to Laura at the Michigan Department of Transportation.
All right, now I get the awkward pause as I try and get my screen shared.
We'll
All
fill the
right.
silence. Oh, there you go. Okay.
All right, Sheehan. All right, hold on. Where did my notes page go? Come on. Oh boy. Okay, hold on for 1 second here. I'm gonna stop share. Like my computer did something funky right before we came on. So let me
Of course it did, right?
It did. You know what? That is just the way of the world, isn't it? Okay, not a problem. I've got something else to do. Okay. We'll do this. Share. And we'll go here. All right, should be up.
Yes.
All right, here we go. Well, hello everyone. My name's Laura Dowd, and I serve as the Chief Rail Engineer for the Michigan Department of Transportation's Office of Rail. At our office here in Michigan, we have 3 primary focus areas. We can include rail safety, infrastructure and asset management, and passenger and freight development. We have a dedicated team of 37 professionals that help ensure Michigan's rail system supports the state's economic needs while maintaining safety for the motoring public, rail passengers, and railroad employees. We have a unique rail landscape here in Michigan. We provide for the passenger rail service. MDOT provides capital and operating assistance, technical support, and safety oversight for Michigan's passenger rail system. We support 3 intercity rail routes, all operated by Amtrak, serving 22 station communities across the state. Something else that's kind of interesting, the state of Michigan owns 665 miles of rail, including a 135-mile segment of accelerated rail corridor connecting Chicago to Pontiac, Detroit, Pontiac, and that segment is between Kalamazoo and Dearborn, where the state of Michigan funds all the capital and maintenance work on that portion of the line. So things that we have found within the state of Michigan that help make our project successful is like, while MDOT owns a portion of the rail infrastructure, we don't actually control the corridor and we are not considered the railroad. And that's where things start to get complex. As you know, working with host railroads brings its own set of challenges. That's why building strong partnerships and collaborating early on your projects is essential. At MDOT, we prioritize consistent engagement with each railroad to understand their priorities and constraints. And that understanding of competing interests and operational realities that we have to deal with is key to delivering successful projects. So like I said, we've had some really good project success, and some key takeaways from our experience here in Michigan is early outreach is absolutely critical. Don't develop a study or a project in isolation. Rail projects are inherently complex, and early coordination with the affected railroads and other stakeholders that could be affected is absolutely essential to properly develop a project scope and plan for the success of the project. Another thing when you're looking at some of these projects is to understand the bandwidth and capacity of staff. These projects require time, resources, and often external support. So be realistic as you're looking and planning some of your projects. Many will require hiring a consultant or multiple consultants to help you through that process. Also, do not assume that your state agency can take over the administration of a grant if you are awarded one. Instead, engage early with your agency to discuss collaboration, roles and responsibilities, and any potential matching funding that they could help provide for your project. And third, think like a railroad. Consider the project from the railroad's perspective. Understand their operational needs, and helping to understand their operational needs and constraints has been the cornerstone of success for the projects in Michigan. I'm going to be fast today. So for us looking ahead, we're really excited about the federal grant opportunities that can help support transformational projects on our intercity passenger rail system, including grade separations, bridge and crossing infrastructure upgrades, track relocations, siding extensions, looking at any potential impact crossings. Each of these different opportunities for improvement help improve that safety and efficiency, but they also come with their own implementation challenges. So again, early coordination and realistic planning are absolutely essential. So I even snuck out a slide in here, kind of snuck in. One of the things that Michigan is super excited about right now is we're considering a new service called the Coast to Coast within the state of Michigan to connect the Detroit area over to Holland, which is kind of an east to west connector. And that as we kind of do the research and kind of plan what that would take to do that, there's a lot of people and coordination and planning and projects that have to be identified, and stakeholders have to be engaged, and there's just a lot of stuff that has to happen to make that project a success. So we're really looking forward to seeing where that goes in the future. So with that, and key lessons, and with those key lessons in mind, I think I'll hand it over to Herbert Smith with Norfolk Southern, who is one of the host railroads that we work with on a routine basis and partner with.
Wonderful. Thank you, Laura. Let me get Herbert's slide up here.
And while Betsy is pulling this up, Herbert Smith with Norfolk Southern Railroad, let me just say kudos to the FRA team, Sergio, Remy, and Lauren. The fact for those that are listening on this webinar, this is a big deal, $5 billion NOFO. I remember early on in my career when the FRA went from a safety implementing and oversight agency to project implementation when stimulus dollars gave the first big infusion of new capital to make improvements for intercity passenger service in coordination with the freight railroads. And here we are, come full life cycle, and a lot of money, a lot of effort has gone in to these discretionary grant programs. So go back, review your notes on this webinar and the 3 previous ones. Read the NOFO. A lot of effort goes in on their part based upon best practices so that they can get the best applications, and ultimately we can enhance passenger service, improve the freight railroads, commuter railroads, all concurrently. So what I will say on the big picture for the railroads, and this really goes for having multiple layers of government for an infrastructure project, multiple railroads, whether it's Amtrak, host railroads, multiple municipalities on these corridors, is that communication is essential. MDOT Office of Rail, Laura, Peter Annister, their Chief Infrastructure Office as well, has done a phenomenal job of communicating at the very beginning of what their intentions are, of what their ultimate goals are. And so what I encourage everyone on this webinar and the notes that you share with your partners is that Big Ten approach saves you so much time and effort by including all stakeholders on the front end, because we're strongest and best when we hear from everybody's thoughts of how we can build infrastructure better, more cost effectively, and quicker. As you're navigating these routes, there's going to be a lot of curves along the way. So I think it's important through this Big Ten approach is to truly hear out every stakeholder. Where are they coming from? What are their perspectives? Because alignment often doesn't happen overnight. It's an iterative process. And putting yourself in each stakeholder's shoes is really important. Laura mentioned from a capacity standpoint. So a lot of municipalities on this webinar that your state DOTs don't necessarily have the capacity to take on your projects. They might have the experience, they might have the relationships with the railroads, but they might not have the ability to take on a whole lot of projects. That's really important to hear from them on the front end of how you can avoid coming upon issues on the back end. The same thing with the railroads. Amtrak operating over host railroad property might have their different goal sets than the host railroads. There might be different impacts. And so hearing from everyone first and truly listening, using that will impact your scoping process, but being responsive in your application scoping, you're going to be a lot more successful in the long run because you've taken everyone's position, opinions, best ideas up front. Then, as you think about this in a bigger picture approach, for the railroads, we look at this from a network perspective. We don't look at one node, we look origin to destination. Our network is really, from the hub and spoke approach, how can we improve service along a corridor? So in some instances, making a safety improvement in one location, making a passenger rail improvement or infrastructure investment in one location might have very limited impact. That's why when you talk to all stakeholders on the front end, you might be able to string together improvements that have a cumulative benefit that far outweigh the initial costs of doing one project in one location. So think about that as you're scoping, because that could have a win-win-win all across the board. ultimately, and for Betsy, for Michael Gaynor, and the entire Go Rail team, this grass tops advocacy, which they are excellent at. If you've not spent time with the Go Rail team, they are fantastic about getting our industry's word out, such as co-hosting this webinar. I encourage you to reach out to them individually. But at the end of the day, those that are able to really reach out and build coalitions are in the best position to be successful in implementing your infrastructure improvements. So reach out, whether it's to the local alderwoman or alderman, reach out to your state elected officials, talk to your congressional offices, get their feedback, get their financial support. And that ultimately will encourage Congress ultimately for future surface transportation reauthorizations to add more money so that this isn't the last $5 billion NOFO, but we're able to prove that we've been stewards of these dollars. We've improved freight, commuter, passenger rail service, and we build it so that they have the confidence to give us more money so we can build more infrastructure. And ultimately, don't think that after you submitted your application that is when you should stop the conversation with all stakeholders. It is a continuum. And the most successful programs that Norfolk Southern has been a part of are ones like the MDOT Office of Rail, in which we speak regularly. We know about all of their plans, those that are underway, those that will be underway, and those that we're building presently. Continue those conversations, create visibility into what you'd like to do, work and realize there are trade-offs, and look at it from a network-wide approach, and you'll be a lot more successful. What I will say as, from a macro perspective, as you're thinking about, your submissions for applications, is really look holistically at potential improvements that maybe instead of, for example, building a grade separation, in one location, perhaps meet passes, sidings, larger control points with crossovers that trains can ultimately move faster through corridors. Those might be, and based upon your initial scoping, better projects than necessarily one roadway overpass or underpass in one location. You might actually be able to improve fluidity, as one example, through a community by building rail infrastructure as part of this approach, that you'll get feedback from Amtrak, that you'll get feedback from your host railroads, then looking at it as a highway project. The final thing I'll say that for best practices and lessons learned is that as you're looking at partnering and you're bringing on or putting an RFI for engineering professional services to scope out your project, highly encourage you on the front end to, within your RFIs for professional services or just as a matter of your best practices, I strongly encourage you to have AREMA engineers that know railroad specifications, that have significant experience with the railroads, particularly the ones that you'll be talking about infrastructure improvements on, so that you don't have several iterations of changes to plans because it's being designed by a highway engineer instead of a railroad engineer. And with that, I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with the Go Rail team, with MDOT Office of Rail and FRA, and I'll turn it back over to Betsy.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Herbert, and everyone. I think that was all really helpful, and let's turn it over to questions in our last few minutes. So I see one of the first questions is about timing around future Amtrak service. So planning around future service, and when you should apply for NRP. Should you do it now or wait until closer to determination? I know this is sort of a specific question, but maybe also a general one.
Oh, hey everyone. Sorry for the awkward posture. You play with the card you're dealt. So apologies for technical issues. But when it comes to whether your project is ready or not, there's a lot of factors that go into that. I think Herbert did a fantastic job of providing, the stakeholder engagement that's necessary. And Laura, provided an overview of kind of I don't want to call them challenges, but the steps you kind of need to take to make sure you have a successful project as well. So as far as whether your project is ready, I think that's a question you sort of have to ask yourself. Whether the project is eligible, based off the question, it sounds like it would be eligible for NRP, so you can apply. But just know that we'll be evaluating things like how far along the service is, your engagement with the host infrastructure owner, who owns the infrastructure. Have you talked to them? Is there a plan laid out? How far in design are you potentially? So those are things we would ask as we're evaluating the application. And if you feel strongly that you can rise to the cream of the crop when it comes to answering those questions, then I would encourage you to apply because the project would be eligible. But if you have some more groundwork to lay down, I would encourage you to look there first. Hopefully that answers that kind of question.
Thanks. All right, here's another one. What is the best way to verify the type of rail component?
Sure, I understand that question. Maybe I'm not too sure, Herbert, Laura.
Like maybe the type of service on a line. And I know you all have, maybe that's it. Could be misreading. You all have a GIS mapping tool, right? That
Yes,
would
yes.
show whether if there is passenger on
Yes, we do. Yes, we have a fantastic map that our GIS team put together. It shows you who the owner of the infrastructure is, who has an operating agreement on the infrastructure, whether it's an intercity passenger rail service or commuter rail service. Remy, who's much younger than me, can point you in the right direction when it comes to GIS. So yes, if you have a specific question on the tool, we'd love to kind of point you in that right direction. So I know Lauren's going to drop our emails in the chat at the end of this, and we have them on the slide, of course. But yeah, we'd love to walk you through that tool if necessary.
Great. There's a question I think that gets at really the non-federal match and maybe in how to make that, how to get those dollars. And maybe that's a question for Laura or I don't know, the FRA team, but maybe examples of different ways those matches are found. And it gets to sort of affluent versus less so communities in this question. So I don't know if you could speak to that.
I can just talk to like the types of matches, and I don't want to dominate. So Laura, if you want to go first, and then I can jump in after, or I can go. So we see all types of matches. Of course, we see it from our local governments, sometimes from the railroad, depending on the type of partnership and the type of project. From the state, of course. Some states have their own competitive grant programs, especially for grade crossings. So if your state has that, I would encourage you to look that way. When it comes to, affluent versus non-affluent, that's a tough one, right? That's such a case-by-case basis. I would say, with surface transportation reauthorization upcoming, if as a municipality or county or town, state, whatever, you have this dire need, but you don't have the financial resources and you feel like the local match is too big of a requirement, I would encourage you to reach out to your congressional representative and have those conversations at that level and start talking about that match requirement. Us at FRA we have to carry out what's in statute. And right now the requirement, unfortunately, is 20%. But, please reach out to your Congress member if you feel like that's a necessary change. Hopefully that answers that question.
Okay, great. Yeah, I don't know if Laura, you wanted to add
Yeah.
anything.
I know we have some communities that will engage with us at the Office of Rail to talk about projects that are safety concerns that they have with bridges or crossings. And, we'll see what we can do to partner or champion those projects forward, especially with the Amtrak line as part of our capital budget. So, so that's kind of how we address some of those because we haven't had a lot of local road funding for some of these projects in the past. So and then we also have funding that if we have match potentially available for certain types of projects in our new budget, I believe. So it could be options for us in the state of Michigan anyway. So approaching that your state agency is always recommended to see what they can do.
Great. Let's see, this is one I've heard before regarding quiet zones and if a quiet zone is a consideration for the grant?
So yeah, the establishment of a quiet zone is actually a separate process from the actual grant application itself. And I'm blanking on the exact code of federal regulations, but we do have what we call CFR that outlines the improvements that are necessary to obtain a quiet zone. But the installation of gates, grade separation, I think these are things that inevitably will lead to a quiet zone. So that grade crossing improvements themselves are eligible, whether that's a grade separation, the installation of gates, signals, things of that nature. The safety improvements are eligible for NRP. But we wouldn't establish that quiet zone as part of the grant application process. That's somewhat straightforward. But
So
if you have
you could use the funding to help your case for a quiet zone, but it wouldn't be a reason that you would qualify for NRP funding.
right. But if you wanted to make a grade crossing improvement, that would be eligible for NRP.
Got it. Okay. Let's see. This is a question about long-term planning. My biggest challenge managing traffic comes from constant increases and the community growing. How do I start the process of planning, preserving the right of way, and submitting applications for grants? And I know we've spoken to that a little, but just a few words of advice.
Yeah, I think my go-to would be to, depending on the type of organization you are, to reach out to the person that owns the infrastructure, right? See if you can establish a relationship. Maybe there's a plan already in place to, account for all the increase in traffic. Depending on, if you're a city, maybe reaching out to the state and see if they've identified it as a potential project of interest. I think the stakeholder engagement piece is core, right, to making sure that everyone's on the same page about the concern. And then once everyone has kind of identified the concern is shared across all parties, maybe you have yourself a grant application. You don't have to apply for construction, right? You can apply for project planning to kind of determine what alternative would be considered. You can even apply for the stakeholder engagement piece of an application. So, don't feel like your application needs to be construction. We're not asking for that. We're just asking for you to apply for what you consider is a necessary stage of your project.
And I think, Betsy, to go off of what Sergio just said, and Laura, if you could speak further to this, for the Michigan line, it actually began by purchasing from Norfolk Southern what had a limited freight usage line that MDOT had this much larger vision that led to hundreds of millions of dollars of improvements in successive iterations, right, Laura?
Yes, absolutely. And even to this date, is used we continue to look for ways to improve the corridor in that way. So but that planning and discussion and understanding how to make that is just still key. So trying to get those questions answered now to figure out how to do that. I know like it's a long lead process, like 2, 3, 4 years plus 10 years as you look into some of the really long-term planning for upgrades. So never too early to planner.
Great. Let's see, how often are these funds available? A couple of questions on that.
Yeah, so this notice of funding opportunity had 2 fiscal years worth of funding. So FY24 and 25. And then we still have FY26 available. So there's still about another roughly $1 billion, well, over that, available worth of funding. So, this isn't your last bite at the apple. We don't have timing on that next NOFO just yet. But, once we do, we'll publish a calendar and then hopefully that'll give people a better sense. But I'll also point out that we have other funding programs, right? We have NRP, of course, but we have CRISI, we have railroad crossing elimination. I know we don't have dates for any of those yet, but we do have funding in all of these programs still available. So there's plenty of infrastructure money to still go around.
That was going to be my question for you, is any word on RCE, the NOFO timing, but that's okay.
Yeah, I wish, we were prepared to be carried out on shoulders here, but unfortunately we don't have that information just yet.
Another thing I'll just add really quickly, grade crossings are a hot topic. We are encouraging grade crossing applications, as you've seen, but just want to reiterate that you can only make improvements to a grade crossing under this program if it falls along an intercity passenger rail route. And any of the grade crossing improvements that you could make in this program, you could also apply for in RCE and CRISI. So this program is definitely more limited. And when it comes to grade crossing eligibility, you can make grade crossing improvements under the Railroad Crossing Elimination Program. You can also make grade crossing improvements under CRISI. You can make those improvements under this program, again, only if they are on an intercity passenger rail route. So ask yourself that question.
To jump off Remy's point too, as well, I see there's a few questions in the chat about already grade separated crossings. And unfortunately, our programs cannot make improvements or replace already grade separated projects. Those are now then considered road projects, which unfortunately FRA cannot fund. So we can only improve or upgrade at grade crossings. Or obviously we can construct a new separation, but we cannot improve already separated crossings, unfortunately.
Got it. That's helpful. Lauren and Team FRA, are there any questions? We only have a couple minutes left. Are there any questions you see in the chat that it's worth prioritizing before we go?
Just a quick one. Someone asked if the BCA guidance is the same version from 2016. And we actually did release, or the department as a whole released updated BCA guidance in May of this year. So that's super up to date, which is great news.
And the BCA is not required for the RCE program, right? So that is sort of a small difference that might be helpful for some communities not having to do the BCA in RCE.
And then on that too, for NRP, if you're just requesting project planning or project development, so it's P and NEPA, your BCA only has to be a qualitative BCA, right? We're not expecting you to throw the book at us in terms of math and do the full scale benefit cost analysis, because we understand the cost estimates are still on development and everything of that nature. So the bar is lowered ever so slightly. It is still a requirement, but not as high as a threshold.
And you could submit the same project application. If it's intercity passenger rail, you can apply to this program, and then you can still submit that same application to CRISI, again, with that BCA, and you could then again submit it to RC if it's not selected, and then without a BCA. So if that is a significant roadblock for you, maybe look to RC.
Got it. All right. I think that brings us to time. Any parting thoughts from any of the panel before we wrap it up?
I'll just, I appreciate everyone attending. Hopefully this was somewhat helpful, and we're always here to help. It doesn't end with this webinar. The questions keep coming and we'll keep answering.
Wonderful. Thanks all.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, Remy, Lauren, Sergio, Laura, and Herbert. This has been a very informative discussion today. And also want to say thank you to our audience members for joining us today. We hope the insights shared today will help you navigate the NRP program and strengthen partnerships in your community. Please remember to check out GoRail's Grant Hub, which we linked in the chat for ongoing updates, tools, and opportunities related to rail funding. We'll also keep you in the loop as the surface transportation reauthorization legislation moves forward. So be sure to subscribe to our newsletter if you haven't already. Thanks again, and we look forward to continuing the conversation.